welcome to my mess. Unusually, I'm halfway through a project and I haven't been filming it so far. I am putting a handle on a plane, a Stanley 101. And I thought this was just going to be a quick thing that I got out of the way yesterday, and so I can get on with the work in hand of building a guitar. And it's kind of taken on a life of its own. I spent 2.5, maybe as much as 3 hours yesterday fashioning this handle. I'll show you in a bit what's been happening. But let's just backtrack a little first to explain why I'm doing this. And it's all because of my lovely little Veritas miniature block plane. I've probably mentioned that I really adore this plane. It works brilliantly. But it gives me blisters. If I'm using this for maybe an hour, I think the hard edges on the casting, or the milling, that it just wears into my fingers, and as a guitarist I can't afford to do that. Now, there are alternatives on the market for miniature planes which fit in the palm of your hand, and here we have the Veritas palm plane. It's got a convex sole, always have to think about that, but this is a slightly different beast to this. This I'd be using to round over the edges of braces and things like that. It's a sort of smoothing tool. This is more of a carving tool, and it has a much smaller sole. So it's not really a direct replacement for this, even if the sole was flat, and there are flat sole versions of this from Veritas that cost about £50. So I could have considered getting one of these to accompany this, but money. Now, Lie-Nielsen make bigger versions of these. They make copies of the Stanley patterns, Stanley 100 and Stanley 101. Now, the 100 has a handle at the back, so it fits in the palm, and that's ideally what I'd want. The Lie-Nielsen version, I think, is about £70. So it is a possibility, but it's money. The 101 from Lie-Nielsen is even more expensive. I think it's touching £90. It's made of bronze and it looks a very nice plane. But what they are copying, the Lie-Nielsen ones, is this, the Stanley 101. This is a vintage plane that I picked up at my local vintage tool shop. I'm lucky to live near a vintage tool shop, and this is a Stanley 101. I think it's a Stanley. It doesn't actually say Stanley on it. It has printed into it, cast into it, 101 at the back, and it's amazing. I absolutely adore this lovely little plane. Let's have a closer look at it. These were originally sold as toys, but I think Stanley realised the worth of them in the sort of mass market, and I think they were then marketed as model makers planes. Lie-Nielsen call this a violin maker's plane, and you can see why. This one is a beveled down plane, which is quite unusual for a small block plane. I think the Lie-Nielsen might be bevel up. I'm not entirely sure. I think also the Lie-Nielsen has a little Norris adjuster, so it isn't a direct copy of this as such, even though the form factor is the same. It is a 101. It's the same size sole. It's a plain blade, bevel down, and just a very simple cap that just screws in. And the fact that I can take everything out like this means that I can add a handle on the back, which is what I was working on yesterday. Now, I spoke to the people in the shop about putting a handle on it, and this is something people do. I couldn't find anything on YouTube, but people do add handles to these planes. But I think most people bolt through the bottom of the sole, and I didn't want to do that. I was hoping that I could just glue this handle on and perhaps do it in a way that was temporary, so I wasn't permanently altering the plane, and if I ever need to adjust the handle or adapt it, I could get the handle off. And I was hoping maybe to use the masking tape super glue trick, putting masking tape around the sides, perhaps masking tape on there, and then just super glue it in, and then have a bond that will, with some force, break away at a later date, but while still being usable. But this is such an awkward shape that there are very few gluing surfaces that are probably properly mated together. The body flares outwards. This central post it flares towards the bottom. We've got the 101 printing on the bottom and this little lump at the back. I've tried my best to fit the handle around all of this and done a fairly good job, but I think the only way I'd be able to glue this in is using epoxy, a gap-filling adhesive, and once it's glued in, it's never going to come out again. So I've had to admit that perhaps bolting through from the underside is actually the way to do this. I'm going to try and do it in such a way as to keep the sole as smooth as possible. Clearly it has to be smooth. I could, as this is a hex bolt, I could maybe fill in the head with solder, having grinded it down to the sole, make everything flat. We'll see how this goes. I'm kind of making this up as I go along, but the plan in this video is to screw through, bolt this on, and then do all the final shaping and get this handle looking pretty and presentable, and something that I will cherish for years to come. My handle is made of wenge, and I've shaped it with a variety of rasps and gouges, and I've tried to shape it over all the little bumps and variety of width, and it's a rustic plane, but I think it's going to work quite well. The next thing I need to do is drill down. I've changed my mind a couple of times on this, but I'm going to be putting a hole down through the handle, and I want it far enough forward that it will that the handle won't pivot around the point, that it'll pull everything tight. I've got a pretty good fit at the moment, but in fact, actually, very good fit, and that'll all cinch together with the bolt. Originally I'd had the bolt further back. I wondered whether I could go as far forward as this, but then the danger is I'm going to blow out at the front here. So I've compromised, and I'm going to end up drilling through the 101, the lip of the zero. So I might have to grind that off before I start drilling. But I'm going to drill through the top using the drill press to keep everything vertical. So I just need to put a little bit of a ledge in here first, just so that I've got a flat surface to drill on. I'm not trying to drill onto an angle. I'm going to use my old Shepak bandsaw. I'm not going to use my new record bandsaw because it's in the garage. It's cold and wet and it's getting dark, and this is convenient. So here we go. I'm just going to do a little bit of extra shaping, just to widen out just around the drill hole. I'm going to go in with quite a big drill to begin with, because I'm going to recess the bolt head, or the nut, I think. The reason for the multiple bore sizes is that I can use a socket to tighten the bolt, pure and simple. is standing very, very slightly proud, but it's not lower than the surface, which is what I wanted. So that should be easy to sand down to flush, but it won't be a dip, and I might fill the hole with solder, possibly. Bolt will need shortening. Right, that's hand tight, and that is very, very solid. Oh, that's a good result. That, yeah, brilliant. Right, I have some shaping to do. We can't put a blade in here at the moment, so we've got to take this edge off here, and then hopefully that will take us down. Maybe a bit of planing will get us down to the right height, and we'll be able to put a blade in. But then we need to do some shaping, and I think I'm going to have the whole rear sort of do this, maybe more of a curve, and then have that nice and curved at the back there. And we'll probably take, well, we'll see. I don't want to take too much off at the moment. Maybe we'll bring that round like that. Oh, I haven't drawn a penis, have I? So far so good. We have a functioning plane, if a little crudely set at the moment. So let's get on and shape the handle. This is feeling quite ergonomic. Sorry to all the left-handers out there, but I might make this a right-handed handle. I may deepen this part here and bring it over this way, and take a little bit off there, just so that my fingers kind of find everything sort of comfortably. Probably be held like that. So yeah, just keep going. That's the basic shaping done. It's not very asymmetric. It's there's more cutaway there than there is there, but it just fits in the hand nicely. And I think I'm happy with that shape. So I'm going to swap out the roll for a 240 grit, do a bit of finish sanding, and we'll get some finish on this. .240. chasing a really smooth finish, just dampen down a paper towel, just dampen the surface, and it raises the grain. I'll do this a few times, I've done this once already. Let it dry, and it just brings the grain up. You sand it again. I'm on 240 grit at the moment. I might do this as well with 400 grit. And just brings the grain up, sand it down again, and you get a much smoother finish. That's now dry, so we sand again. .400 grit. And after this, I think we'll put some oil on it. I'm going to finish with a rather old batch of Crimson Guitars finishing oil. I hope it's still okay. Whoops, as I nearly spill it everywhere. Well, it looks oily. And I'm going to work it in with 1500 grit, wet and dry. Slather it all on, it absorbs well. And the idea is you put this on, let it dry for 10-20 minutes, and then rub off any excess. You want to get rid of any of the excess, and that way you get a good finish. You don't want to leave any oil sitting on the surface. You want to make sure you put plenty on, get it well worked in, and then rub off all of the excess that you can get. Oh, that's looking lovely. Yes. That's what we want to see. So this is the first coat. I probably need to flood it. I'll put a bit more on. And I'm hoping that rubbing it in like this will act as a bit of a pore filler, because wenge is a very open grain wood, although this is looking amazing actually. Don't really think I need much pore filling. It's lovely as it is. I think we need even more. This is just soaking in. That's got it well and truly soaked in now. I'm just going to continue sanding for a bit, and then we'll come back when it's starting to get tacky. That's getting quite tacky now, so I'm just going to wipe off all of the excess. And this way it will dry properly. It won't stay tacky as it would if you've got lots of oil on the surface. And we have the option of then applying another coat later, which I probably will. That is lovely and secure. I've just got to take the head of the bolt off. It's just proud of the surface. Quick tip, you must put the blade in and tighten the cap before you flatten the sole. Even though the blade is retracted, the blade must be retracted of course, get that nice and tight, it's because that can distort the sole of the plane. So you want everything as it would be when you're planing before you start flattening the sole, and the blade is slightly retracted. The blade isn't proud of the sole. This is just ordinary sandpaper to begin with. It's what I've already got on my glass levelling plate. So let's give it a go with that and see how we get on. Yeah, that's almost there actually. That's making very quick work of it. You can see it's taking off at the front and back, so and it's taken some off the head of the bolt. It's possible the act of putting a handle on this has actually distorted the sole, but I don't think it would have been distorting this much up the front. I think the sole was quite concave. This sandpaper is definitely not 80 grit anymore, so we'll give it a bit of a 120 grit. We're very nearly there. Probably ruin this paper as well. I might leave it at 120 grit actually. There are a few scratches in the sole, but it's looking pretty good. I don't like to use the expression good enough, but I think that is good enough. There are still some little depressions around here, and there's some, I think this used to be corrosion around here, so I'd have to take a significant portion of the sole away, I think, to get it completely smooth. But there is one final thing I will do, and that is to just take a little bit off the nose, like so. Don't wear away on my ruler. I'll use the back. And that just makes sure that the very front of the plane doesn't dig into the work. So you can see we've just taken off just a fraction at just the first 3 or 4 millimeters of the plane. That's all I'm going to do, and I'll just take away any sharp edges. Should we do the rear? I think I might do the rear as well, just a little bit. Yeah. And that is it. And one final touch, put a little bit of wax on the sole just to keep it lubricated and rust free.